This past summer, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and one of the main issues that's been troubling me is consumption. Chiefly, why consuming excessively is so embedded in the lives of people that live in developed economies. I believe that we consume to fulfill a myriad of actual needs, often psychological needs. Most of us can agree that self-medicating ourselves by hoarding possessions is not an effective cure in the long run, and doesn't make us happier on any profound level. Just a quick disclaimer. As a student, everything I learn and absorb has a really big impact on my way of thinking. So like anyone, I have the right to build on these ideas and possibly think differently one day. And in addition, I am in no way declaring myself a non-consuming saint, but purely seeking answers to how I could change my habits and why I consume the way I do. I'll be drawing heavily on the ideas of Robert and Edward Skidelsky in their fantastic book, How Much Is Enough? Money and the Good Life. I recommend this book to anyone who is interested in economics at all, or psychology, as it offers a non-status quo idea of how an economy could be organized. So first, I'd like to address some arguments for where the roots are to this consumption mania. To begin to answer the question of why we seem to have infinite insatiable wants, we must examine many avenues. One of the most interesting ones concerns the assumptions that are inherent in the modern schemes of economics in use today. Needs and wants are not the same. Needs are the objective requirements for a good and comfortable life, whereas wants are purely psychic and infinite. In fact, one of the most classic definitions for the discipline of economics is how to best allocate scarce resources to satisfy infinite wants. I think the problem is already within that definition. As an idea, infinite wants, or the infinite desire for growth that follows, it's quite disturbing. See, it wasn't always this way. In his essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, John Maynard Keynes believed that after enough economic growth, we would actually reach a point of enough, a point of satiation. At this point, we would start reducing our working hours for more true leisure time and start living the good life. This hasn't happened. The main economic goal of capitalist societies is economic growth. I think this notion goes hand in hand with insatiability and how this translates to our consumption habits. So why are we driven to consume? Let's examine some conditions that hold in the modern labor market, where firms are doing their best to cut costs. It is profitable to have fewer permanent workers that work long hours than to have many workers that work less, because benefits must be paid to each worker. So as a result, the labor force becomes segmented into permanent workers that work more than they want, and part-time and unemployed people that work less than they want. We have a lot of dissatisfied people, and this has consequences. To relieve frustration and to keep overworking people docile, they're offered a stream of useless, mind-numbing consumer goods. Shopping is accurately called retail therapy, a compensation for unpleasant or depressing experiences. The creation of artificial needs ensures workers' loyalty to the work ethic. In essence, this keeps the economy going. So a vicious cycle forms. People overwork to earn salaries to support themselves. Not only to support themselves, but to cater to the artificially created desires that seem like needs. Even higher earning workers are caught in a vicious cycle of dependence on their incomes. Once you have a high earning job, you're expected to live a high class life. The book mentions an example of a Harley Street neurologist who worked his way up to a 60-hour work week to pay off his 90% mortgage on his £1 million dream house. Not only is it enough for him to overwork his way through the payment of his mortgage, but also to run the costly household and pay for the cavalcade of servants, nannies, and private education for each of his children. Although the neurologist may be living a lavish lifestyle, the upkeep of his life depends just as much on his income as any lower earning household. Therefore, if unemployment hits, it hits on all levels of income. This is one of the reasons why many Wall Street bankers lost their homes so quickly after being laid off in 2008. This is a core issue in modern capitalism. we're driven to consume unnecessarily and way past our true needs. So what's interesting to look at is what proportion of our desires comes from within and what are conditioned by external influences. Those of us that inhabit westernized capitalist economies face a myriad of these influences daily. While advertising has an impact, the structure of our entire society seems to be built to condition us to need things. Sometime in the 19th century, governments stopped enforcing moral standards on what humans should do and instead started exploiting what they naturally do. To quote Tyler Durden from Fight Club, advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy we don't need. Advertising tries to convince us that above average products can compensate for below average traits. And if we aren't already insecure, media-enforced ideals will make us insecure. The author George Monbiot says, "Invention is the mother of necessity. To keep their markets growing, companies must keep persuading us that we have unmet needs. They must encourage us to become dissatisfied with what we have. To be sexy, beautiful, happy, and relaxed, we must buy their products. They shove us onto the hedonic treadmill, on which we must run even faster to escape a growing sense of inadequacy. Advertising encourages us to compare ourselves with those we perceive to be better off. It persuades us to trash our happiness and trash the biosphere to answer a craving it exists to perpetuate." And the novelist Douglas Rushkoff makes the same argument in The Guardian. "The consumer must never be allowed to reach his goal, for then consumption would cease. He must never feel completely at home in the present, or he will stop striving towards a more satisfied future. Since consumption makes up about half of all economic activity in America, a happy consumer would spell disaster." These ideas shed light on how the system cultivates us as mega consumers to spin the wheel of economic activity. One of my favorites, Malcolm Gladwell, actually wrote on the science of shopping in The New Yorker. "The practice of prying into the minds and habits of American consumers is now a multi-billion-dollar business. Every time a product is pulled across a supermarket checkout scanner, information is recorded, assembled, and sold to a market research firm for analysis. There are companies that put tiny cameras inside frozen food cases in supermarket aisles, market research firms that feed census data and behavioral statistics into algorithms and come out with complicated maps of the American consumer. Anthropologists who sift through the garbage of carefully targeted households to analyze their true consumption patterns." I think that quote really sheds light on this idea of how we're being exploited rather than aided in this issue. And another counter-argument, I suppose, would be that, which the Skidelskys mention in their book, is that even if consumer preferences can diverge from real needs, they cannot be entirely independent of those needs. They cannot be instilled in us by the productive apparatus or some other monster. Advertising can shape desires, but it cannot create desires out of nothing. There must be some prior tendency in human nature for advertising to latch onto, otherwise its empire over us would be mysterious. And I think it's quite an interesting view because it points out that there is some kind of natural tendency from within for this insatiability, but it's being distorted and exploited by capitalism and the way our economy works. So let's take a look at this idea of that insatiability within. Skidelsky says that we become restless, we become bored with what we have. The satisfaction of all needs, the elimination of all discomforts, produces a state, not of contented tranquility, but of dissatisfaction, which has to be relieved by novelty, as an itch needs to be relieved by scratching. As affluence increases, boredom grows, provoking an ever more frantic search for stimulating experiences. Our inherent nature is such that we are never satisfied with what we have. Even our friend from ancient Greece, Plato's Socrates, argues that this is not the path to the good life. In the Gorgias, Socrates has an exchange with Callicles in which he presents an analogy. He describes the human mind as equivalent to a set of glass jars. The self-disciplined mind has a set of intact glass jars that are filled with liquids, honey, milk, and wine, which are hard to come by, and it takes a great deal of strenuous work to attain them. Once the man has filled up his jars, He stops channeling the liquids into his jars and gives them no further thought. He can rest easy. The other character is just as capable of getting the liquids, but his vessels are cracked and flawed, and he's forced to work day and night at keeping them full, or he will suffer terribly. Socrates goes on to claim that a life of self-indulgence is much unhappier than one of self-discipline. He compares that kind of mind to a gully bird, one that eats and excretes at the same time. So Socrates argues that a life spent scratching an itch is less comfortable than a life of being content, because need and desire are in themselves unpleasant sensations. So he goes on to point out to Callicles that even though the man with the leaky jars might be feeling constant pleasure, he's also feeling constant displeasure because he's wanting and desiring things. And in addition, the pleasure that he's feeling is from a bad source. A distinction between good and bad pleasures is therefore key. Now, bringing this argument back to our case, one could claim that constantly consuming things, whether it's buying yet another gadget, dress, or vase, doesn't yield long-term happiness, but it is a quick fix to the distressed lives that we lead. Meaningful activities have the power to make us truly happy, not ill pleasures, which yield an illusion of pleasure and an illusion of the good life. The question is it human nature to want more? Not necessarily things, but success, love, community, family, status. Perhaps humans are naturally driven to personal growth, but must this translate into an insatiable appetite to consume? See, this inner tendency to insatiability has always been recognized, but was previously held in check by prohibitions and countervailing ideals. The issue is that these ideals have now lost ground or vanished entirely. The influence of many dominant religions is one to denounce luxury and avarice. It was money, after all, that tempted Judas to betray Christ. The goal of Catholic economic thought is a system in which riches exist for man, not man for riches. In ancient India, the Dharma Sutras, the ancient law codes of the Brahmins, show a clear attitude towards wealth. As a man gets old, the yearning for life and wealth shows no sign of aging, unlike his teeth and hair. Fools find it difficult to give up yearning. It does not weaken with age. A man who gives up yearning finds happiness. For the Western traditions, avarice is a perversion and misdirection of desire. For the Brahmins, it is an expression of the slavery inherent in desire itself. He who is without desire, he who is freed from desire, he goes to Brahma, which could also be called nirvana. So I think those religious ideas used to kind of act as a buffer for the way that we acted and consumed. Many will agree that the guiding moral influence of religions has declined steadily in the past few centuries as political philosophy has steered governments to become secularized, and the moral landscape has shifted significantly due to a decline in faith in many democracies. In addition, the political liberal age has forbid one to tell another how to live his life. We have become lost and our moral ground has become weakened. Indeed, Stephen Miles claims that consumerism is the new religion. It apparently pervades our everyday lives and structures our everyday experiences. Our city centers are more remarkable as sites of consumption than they are as cultural sites. Our homes might be described as temples to the religion of consumption. Our lives apparently amount to little more than a constant juxtaposition of diverse consumer styles and tastes. This sounds horrifying to me, that the purpose of a human life has been stripped only to become a servant of this kind of economic system. And another possible source is that our brains are increasingly becoming geared to be bored very quickly. A recent report by Microsoft showed that in the last 13 years, our attention span shortened by 4 seconds to only 8 seconds, which is 1 second less than a goldfish. This is most likely due to the excessive time we spend using technology on a daily basis. The way we interact with technology is extremely stimulating. Many mega consumers of technology cannot sit still and let their thoughts wander without feeling the need to check their phones. While this may seem novel, perhaps this is why the possessions we surround ourselves by become boring quicker than ever before. To accommodate the contemporary attention span, should our possessions be updated as actively? A newsfeed or a chat never looks the same. I feel that we're addicted to the novelty and ever-changing nature of technology and want to apply this to our everyday lives. We're addicted to novelty in food and in sex. Why not shopping? Perhaps we consume not only to have more, but to fill our environments with new things we haven't yet become tired of. If the prehistoric man were to be transferred into our time, he would wonder why we aren't happier. We're living in a golden age of sorts, and we are squandering it with all these anxieties. Addiction and depression are part of everyday conversation. So here are a few emotional needs we try to compensate for by consuming. The first one is identity. My favorite comedian, John Oliver, once started one of his shows with the line, "Fashion, personality you can buy." And most shoppers will probably agree that consuming products, particularly ones you wear and that are visible to others, build identity. They enable you to signal to others of your status, financial situation, tastes, lifestyle, health. Many will claim building an identity with products rather than personality is an easier way to achieving confidence. In reality, the need that we are seeking to fill is meaningful and complex. We want to feel like we matter, like we are special and attractive. We want to feel like we have direction and be motivated to pursue our passions. We also want to feel like we belong. Carrying the shopping bag of a high-end brand or well-known department store allows us to be part of it for one day. But this is all an illusion. The second has to do with rewarding oneself. So we buy to cheer ourselves up in times of failure or stress. We buy to reward ourselves for a job well done. We buy to celebrate. It seems like there's always a reason to buy. The pleasure of a purchase reminds us of how well we have done and rewards us with a near intoxicated state. This sensation is a fleeting illusion. Don't we deserve rewards that last longer? My third point is about mental preparation. So, shopping can be used as a method of mental preparation. As people shop, they're naturally visualizing how they'll use the products, they're considering, and in doing so, they're also visualizing their new life. We try to map and structure the future, which is completely unknown. The two most shop-intensive times of our lives are also two of life's greatest transitions, so getting married and having a baby. While this mental preparation can be helpful to some, I feel there are other methods like quiet contemplation or discussing anxiety with a loved one. Self-medicating ourselves by consuming is not a sustainable option. Consumption of products has now become a significant measure of our lives. Certain products are bought for every milestone. The first cot, first stuffed animal, first bike, first double bed. The consumerist society has taught us to signpost our lives with products and possessions. We are being indoctrinated to consume from birth. Finally, I think it's also a matter of emotional relief and comfort. The Wall Street Journal recently reported on types of people that are most likely to become impulse buyers. So it's people who are emotionally tapped out because of family or work demands. But finally, people who are unable to express their anger. They typically have high standards of niceness, or they're simply overlooked by others. Impulse purchasing is often fueled by anger that needs an outlet and a craving for relief. When we shop or consume, we think we are fulfilling our needs, but in reality, we're only postponing them. This isn't a solution. Another point as to why we're able to consume so much is that we're unfazed by current and imminent environmental disaster because we're out of touch with nature. We've become almost entirely dissociated from the wild. If nature holds no place and no value in one's life, one will not be affected when we're told that we're destroying it. We have lost touch with where things are coming from in the natural world. We don't realize where the materials come to produce the products that we purchase, and we don't care either. The economist and philosopher Slavoj Žižek says, if we do have an active conscience to care, doing our part for the environment is already embedded in consumption. When the price of a product includes a donation, it is produced ethically or in a green way. You buy something like Tom's shoes or Starbucks coffee, which have environmental and ethical goals that they want to fulfill, and that way we transfer the responsibility onwards, so we are freed of our guilt. you feel like you're fulfilling a whole series of ethical duties. But in reality, this kind of consuming is really bad because we're freed of our guilt, and hence we will continue to do just as before because we don't feel like we need to actually reduce our consumption because we've already done something for the environment. If those are some of the reasons why we consume, I think it's also a really big problem that few prominent agents want to reduce consumerism. You see, when I was doing research for this video on why we shop, the overwhelming majority of hits on Google had to do with the optimal conditions for highest consumption, so how we can be convinced to consume more. I believe this is a grave issue. Putting the individual in the most sensitive condition and teasing out all of his weaknesses in order to exploit them to make a profit shouldn't be the collective goal of society. So, what should we do instead? One of the things that I think is really central to the cure is practicing a lot of gratitude and checking your privilege. Most people that consume excessively have the means to really live a good, comfortable life. And I think keeping that in mind on a daily basis will really help to realize that it's not necessary to go out and consume more. One of the issues is that we know how to build appliances that are going to last for 30 years. But we don't know how to design appliances that consumers will want to keep for 30 years because they haven't been trained to cherish things for that long. So I think that this is a really good way to start solving the problem is to, in essence, put more meaning into purchasing something. So less consumption would result from purchasing long-term durable goods. But not only that, putting a great deal of thought, research, and sentiment into acquiring something would really change the game. There are lots of other benefits to feeling and expressing gratitude, most notably happiness. So, consuming isn't making us any happier. I want to address this idea of a mental lightness or relief. So, when we have less things, less stress and time is associated with them, some professionals opt for creating their own uniform that they can wear every day so they won't have to choose from a massive wardrobe each morning. The paradox of choice is a real thing. Another thought is that when we think of recession and difficult economic times, we think of only negative things because we've been taught to believe that growth is good and anything that's not growth is bad. Those kind of times when we don't have the money to spend should be cherished. It may sound a bit silly, but the state of having less can be relieving because we don't have the option of worrying about how we're going to spend it. Our focus in everyday life turns to things money cannot buy. We learn to be grateful for the people in our lives and to appreciate the beauty of our environments, for example. In addition, it's a well-known fact that after a certain level of income, further growth has next to no impact on happiness levels. The most effective cures to our emotional issues lie in matters that can't be purchased at all. Even though it may seem more difficult, building your own identity is a matter of creating something and putting yourself out to the world, or building on your character and doing things that you love and are passionate about, whatever that may be. I believe that in order to change our habits, we all have to take a moment to ourselves and really think about why we're consuming the way that we are. There are other methods of solving these problems and fulfilling these true emotional needs that we seem to be struggling with. Including myself, I encourage you all to take that moment and have a think for yourself. Thank you.